Time's now to get the latest in new science from New Scientist magazine. We do it with Janine Young joining us in Canberra today. Good morning, Janine.
Good morning, Wammo.
And today, first up, we're talking about the problem with Generation Y. Tell us all about the problem with that whole big Generation Y, eh?
Well, it is very easy to give Gen Y a bashing. I mean, they've been accused of all sorts of things, like having an overinflated opinion of themselves. You know, they're narcissistic, they're spoilt, they're arrogant, undeserved sense of entitlement. I think we know the arguments and the complaints that particularly older people have made about them. And I must confess, I'll disclose, I'm firmly Gen X, so I'm stepping back and attempting to be a bit objective here and attempting to be a bit scientific.
Sure.
But the question is whether or not Gen Y really is more egotistical and has issues with self-esteem different to previous generations. And there's a number of people that have been working on this for a long time. There's a woman called Jean Twenge who's at the San Diego State University, and she's among the most vocal and most vehement of critics. And she's basically saying that these children have, and they're not children now, they're actually young adults when I think about it, because Gen Y runs between about 1980 and about 2000. So there's quite a large gap there. But it's saying that they actually have different levels of self-esteem, so what they think of themselves, than previous generations. Now, some of these studies are looking at freshmen, so college students in the United States, and they're saying that they actually believe that they have higher levels of self-confidence than, or 52% of them did in 2009, compared with 30% in 1966 saying that they had higher levels of self-confidence than the rest of the population. And this is really interesting because they're relating, and they're saying that their intellectual self-confidence, their public speaking skills, their leadership ability is so much better than previous generations. You know, they're saying, we're great. And that in itself doesn't sound like such a bad thing, because you think, well, you know, having confidence in yourself surely can't be bad. Well, it kind of can, because if you have an inflated idea of how good you are, then you can develop unrealistic expectations for what you're going to be able to do in the future. And if you've been told all your life that you're fantastic and you're great and, you know, you can do anything you want and the sky's the limit, and you don't, then maybe you're not going to be able to deal with that.
Are they
so well?
Well, are they a product of a generation that was brought up in the good times?
I'd say it's partially that. There's also a suggestion that there's the changing culture through a number of different countries across the world, particularly the United States. The rise of individualism has become huge in the United States in particular, and that's where it's been best studied. People know the most about it there. They also think that it has a lot to do with changes in parenting styles. In the 1980s, there was very much an idea that if you raise a child's self-esteem, then they're going to do better in life. The cult of celebrity, I think we've all seen that in the last 20 or 30 years. The internet and easy credit, all these things are apparently contributing to how people have an inflated sense of their self, where the appearance of importance is more important than the actual performance itself. And this idea of, you know, self-esteem, it's called the self-esteem movement, was started in the 1980s that showed a correlation between high self-esteem and positive life events, so how things turned out. Therefore, people jumped to the conclusion that self-esteem was the cause of these events, and it's not. Apparently, it's just one of those things where because you're doing good things, you end up with good self-esteem. So what they're suggesting now is that parents should in fact be teaching their children self-control.
Right.
And actually looking at how they can help others, because the more you do good for others, the better you feel about yourself. But others benefit as well. Learning that if you have willpower and you stick with something and you go for the long-term goal, you'll actually do better and you'll feel better for yourself. And therefore you'll have self-belief, which is a completely different thing.
Yeah. Generation Y, I guess, would be feeling a little bit more during these tough economic times, feeling the the tough edge of it, I suppose, more than anyone else.
Yes, well, as you say, they've been raised in the good times and with parents who've always wanted to, and of course every parent wants to give the best to their children. They never want to, you know, send them off and pack them off and go, okay, here's your tough times, off you go. But unfortunately, that's life. You know, life is not all about good things. And it's really important that these children now that are being brought up need to learn that they're loved, even though they're not perfect.
Yeah.
Who would have thought they're not perfect?
Yeah.
And it's important that they need to learn that they can still improve. There's always something that you can pick on and something you can do better, and you should constantly be striving to improve yourself instead of just assuming that, frankly, oh, great, the world needs to come to me. That kind of attitude isn't really going to help anybody.
Okay, moving on. Let's look at these plans by China to divert a dam on one of their great rivers that run off Tibet's high plateau. And this is raising the issue of future water disputes.
Absolutely. They're not just looking at damming one, they're looking at damming five rivers: the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Irrawaddy, the Salween, and the Mekong. These are among the biggest rivers, and the Tibetan Plateau is one of the largest sources of fresh water on the planet. 1.3 billion people take their water from this plateau for irrigation and drinking. Now, China is saying, well, we have massive population growth, we've got energy and agricultural issues, we need to feed our people. How do you suppose we're going to be able to do that if we don't start damming a lot of these very large rivers? Up till now, they've largely been doing this within their own borders, but now they're starting to move into international waters. And so they're moving into areas that potentially can affect downstream areas, such as India, Bangladesh. They're moving into northern Pakistan to be able to dam the Irrawaddy, which is another very big river. Now, of course, India's getting upset about this because they dispute the territory. They're actually saying it's theirs. They're damming it. So the Irrawaddy's in Burma. I'm talking about a completely different river that's just escaped my mind. Take it back. It's the Indus, that's right.
Okay.
The Irrawaddy in northern Burma. Even though they're going to be damming that, and there's now a dispute around that, well, because the new government in Burma has said, whoa, hang on, hold down. The generals approved this, and we don't think this is going to go so well because there's a number of villages that are going to be flooded, and they're rioting, not surprisingly. So even though it's been dammed in Burma, all of the power, or 90% of it, will go to China.
Right.
So you've got those sorts of issues there. But perhaps the bigger problem is that if you do dam a lot of these very big rivers, the downstream effects, even though, you can get the hydroelectric power or you can get the water irrigation, you can divert it off, as China is talking about doing, the downstream events can be really very serious. There's a bunch of modelling that was done on the Burma dam that's now been put on hold by the new government, and it was an unpublished environmental impact assessment that was saying that it shouldn't be dammed because it was going to flood important forest ecosystems. Other modelling has shown that a 10 to 20% reduction in flowing in the area leading into Bangladesh could dry out much of Bangladesh for most of the year. You're going to start getting salt invasion into the Bay of Bengal because you don't have the flood pulses coming down like you normally would do. The Mekong is going to start finding salt inundation as well. There's a lot of problems here, and China is mainly interested in its own interests, as a lot of countries will do, and not really thinking about the downstream efforts. And what's really interesting is that China was one of only 3 nations to vote against a proposed UN treaty on sharing international rivers. I don't think we should be surprised at that somehow.
Yeah, so it gives an indication of where military disputes might occur in the future, over these kinds of resources, the most basic of resources being water.
Geopolitical politics very, very clearly is going to be driven by these sorts of things, because if you have drought right across parts of Bangladesh, people aren't going to be happy, and therefore they're going to be looking to their government and saying, why haven't you done something about this? Then going to be looking at China and going, well, you did this. Bang, off you go. There's a start before you even try.
Yeah.
India and China have a slightly tetchy relationship as it is. Then you've got Pakistan and India getting upset together. The whole area is set for all sorts of big issues, and we know that some of the wars of the future are going to be fought over water because these basic resources are essential for life. You cannot live without them.
Indeed. All right. Well, those 2 stories you'll find in the New Scientist magazine, the next New Scientist magazine, or newscientist.com. Thanks very much, Janine.
Thanks a lot.
Tom Lark.